Hey everybody, it's noon Pacific on Monday. I'm Erika Heald, your Content Chat host, and today we have a very special guest, my friend Carlos Abler, who you may not have seen around these parts speaking recently, but hopefully we will be seeing him at all the conferences and all the things, because I gotta tell you, one of the best post-conference dinner and conversations I've had in my entire life was with Carlos after Content Marketing World one year at the now closed Michael Simon's restaurant Lola in Cleveland. So, Content Marketing World, Cleveland, amazing food, amazing conversation. We're going to basically be bringing you that here today on Content Chat, except you're going to have to bring your own food. Sorry about that. We just don't have enough drones to bring you all food. So, Carlos, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be with you. And it is strange not having mind-blowingly incredible food mediating our discussion. Oh, there's Ardith. Hey, Ardith. So an honor to have her here. Good to see you again. I miss you. Anyway, yeah, it's just so great, and I'm so grateful to Cleveland, and the content marketing world people for helping to, nurture this greater community and bring us together, because there's people I truly treasure I've met through that world, and you are absolutely one of them. So it's great to be here with you.
Thank you so much. And I love the topic that you proposed today, because I think you and I really, we're people who creating content isn't something that we do as a job. It's something that we do and we are. We are people who create. We are people who read, who write, who make things. And it's funny because for so many folks, that's like, oh, it's an expense that, companies have to endure in order to sell their products.
Mm-hmm.
But we've both been in situations where, in fact, the content has become this innovation engine that has even, frequently become its own revenue source. And it 100% has been key to the ability for an organization to actually be self-sustaining. So I am hopeful that today we'll be able to show folks, and you've got some fantastic examples to really show, both the theory behind what it is that content really can do and the really practical examples of how to. And I encourage folks throughout. Carlos brought slides because we're going to be going through a bunch of really cool concepts and ideas. We'll share the slides with you in the recap after, so that way you can spend some time with that and spend some time with the recording. But that said, we're going to dive in, and if you've got questions, ask them as we go along, because I'm going to be asking them too. And with that, take it away, Carlos.
Great. Are we in the presentation mode with the big giant fist with the pencil in it?
There we are.
Okay, there we go. The content revolution. We decided to pick a nice provocative title for this. Content as a driver for business and social impact. So there are some ideas and key themes that it's helpful to have some visuals for on this. And certainly I'd love to be out of this deck as much as possible and have this be as organic as possible. And Erika, I can't see you, so please squeak at me if please stop the Carlos tsunami at any time.
Will do.
And I want to make sure I'm hearing from you, and that this, I feel like we are back at dinner together again. So I don't want this to be one way, although there is a lot. So I might be moving a little quickly around some things. So there's a fundamental concept we have here around content innovation as a business strategy. And when, it's one thing when we talk about, okay, how do we deliver more valuable content that delivers value and not just promises it and talks about it, content as product versus communication, all that type of thing. And there's a lot of maturity out there. Content marketing world and folks like you and all the other conferences and thought leaders have been doing a great job at helping to advance practice in the world around doing this, around converging publishing expertise into business, and all of the themes that for those of us who have drunk the Kool-Aid long ago of content marketing are very familiar with this. But how do we sustain and operationalize that value delivery? And surfacing innovation as a concept in this, not as another warring neologism or anything like that, but as a really important concept to understand, why do certain content marketing programs actually work and others don't? What does it take to sustain innovation and all that? And really, innovation and some other concepts like design thinking and some other things are really key to bring into practice. And I have like like literally hundreds and hundreds of slides on this, as well as operational models and templates and business processes, because I've operationalized this stuff globally before. So I have a lot of stuff here. There's a lot to it. And so trying to find what can I really focus on with this very important topic in a very short time frame, such as this conversation. The thing I really wanted to surface up has to do with really the convergence of value models. So if we think about business value, the business value of content, such as serving marketing, sales, supporting the customer relationship, efficiency around that type of thing, whatever it is, whether it's direct revenue, whether it's revenue assist, whatever it is, we have all these business value and metrics. And then we, of course, have our audience and content value models. So how is it that that content is actually going to deliver relevance and value to the audiences, to the customers, to the consumer of that content, and all of that? And then we have the social impact and sustainability content value models. And here I normally actually show those as one circle, because very often when we pick underneath the value propositions that are being delivered to people through successful content marketing products and services and so on, a lot of times we are actually already in the social impact space. And I'm going to unpack more of what that means in some upcoming slides. But really, this comes from models around sustainability, around social sustainability, social cohesion, human capacity development. When you help a doctor become a better doctor, when you help a welder become a better welder, when you're helping a person establish their legacy, whenever any of those kind of value propositions very often overlap with things that involve sustainability and social impact. However, a lot of folks coming from a content background, it's hard enough to find people in business who have a very deep content background, or people from a deep content background who have an innovation and product innovation background, let alone a social impact background. So, and underneath all of these, there are value models that I've over the years have accumulated and made into one coherent framework of analyzing opportunity, both for innovation and business value. And so I've had kind of a unique angle from seeing this convergence, both in my practice as a content marketing doer and leader and so on, but also because, and I'll show you some of what this is in a moment. But because of my background in working in social impact, I'm a juror and mentor and national expert for an organization called the World Summit on the Information Society. And we award and support people who are using content and the internet in ways that help deliver social impact, such as reducing infant and maternal mortality at scale, or increasing democratic participation in various countries and so on. And from now over a decade of doing this and having won the award before and just being immersed in this, I've been analyzing, because I judge about somewhere between 40 to 80 projects a year for the World Summit Awards. And I've, especially having been at 3M, where you see literally hundreds and hundreds of pitch decks and all the conference decks I would read. I estimated I analyzed over 2,000 decks in my almost decade at 3M as leader of content marketing strategy. And in that entire time, I've been accumulating this value driver framework from all of these models. And I see that there's a lot of overlap here. So this is one of the key things, is that omnichannel content marketing and sustainability inevitably converge via the content value design practices that make content helpful and subscribable. And this becomes a success factor for the effectiveness of programs. And to a degree, because of everything I've been saying, businesses may have already been doing some of this, but rarely consciously, because there are conscious ways to go about social impact innovation and other types. But also sustainably, very often what happens is we set up these things that should be treated like revenue generating products and services that are a part of the business function, but they still get treated like campaigns and communications initiatives. So they're not dealt with sustainably, which we'll see in a case study I'm about to bring up with Johnson & Johnson, where I worked on a diabetes lifestyle wellness management platform that eventually devolved into a blog because it was operationalized, as these things often are, inconsistently, like content assets and so on are, on more of a campaign basis rather than seeing them as a continuous product for value-added delivery. So sustainability and then integrated speaks to the issue of how we're looking at the entire enterprise, how we're looking at the entire stakeholder stakeholder ecosystem, and how all of the different value creation and generation opportunities across that whole landscape need to map to all of these cross-functional, departmental silos in the organization to have an integrated overall process, which is the world of business is basically set up to make that almost impossible, which is why the people who drive this stuff need to be a certain type of person and have certain kinds of backgrounds, and teams need to operate in certain kinds of ways in order to integrate across barriers that are almost designed to repel integration. So it's a big challenge, but also a really big opportunity.
And I'm going to stop you right here to note that this, to me, is also the difference between actual content marketing and content strategy. It's the difference between having those approaches and just creating content that may as well be a brochure or a sales sheet, because too many people think that they're doing content marketing when in fact they're just creating random pieces of content. They're not actually doing content marketing. So this, as you can see here, this is going to be one of those like deep dives and kind of a heady conversation. And I'm just so happy that you're able to, bring this stuff to life in a very different way. So now, please proceed.
Yeah. And so why innovation? Like why am I elevating that term a lot? And I love like the people from our world who are doing that a lot more. Like Carla Johnson, for example, is really fired up around innovation, and that's exactly not the right, but a right thing to focus on. It's so critical. So it enables the value delivering product versus value promising communications, aka content marketing, as you were just saying. And so value delivery is often where people struggle and where the opportunity lies. And it also grounds content practice in objective content value design criteria. Because if you're going to stand something up and go up in front of a bunch of investors and say, hey, I want tens of millions of dollars to launch this thing or to sustain this thing, that thing's got to deliver. But, we get a lot of faux accountability for things in our organizations, where on the one hand, sometimes we can set up a corporate publication or something that has basically zero audience. In other words, it's almost done like a hobby with no accountability on the one hand. Or we end up with a lot of unrealistic expectations for what it can deliver. A lot of times, not because they couldn't have been delivered, but because that more comprehensive view wasn't taken on how to ensure that they can deliver value cross-functionally. Increase relevance and impact and decrease non-content, and you just said it, random acts of content and the arbitrary in general. Increase true purpose and decrease optics only purpose and crimes against authenticity. So when we start to talk about, okay, there's social justice and various kinds of issues going on, and everyone wants businesses to be more respectful of humanity and contributors to the community and forces of good in the world. We as human beings want this. It's just a reflex. It's what it is to be a living organism, is to want that. And so, but how do we do that? That still has to be operationalized and productized as some kind of value delivery. And the compensation for that ends up in communication, where people put up optics only sort of nods to purpose, which also have their role, because we do need to have rhetoric and we need to express principles and we need to show solidarity. And so communications absolutely always has a role in this, but it's nothing quite like, let's say, reducing infant and maternal mortality at scale across India, for example. Like, you just can't compare that kind of impact. So harnessing the in-between spaces between organization silos, data, content, programs, and stakeholders. So it's a very unifying and synergetic type of thing. It gives you good reasons to use the word synergy and emergence. And it's deeply invitational because it benefits from collaboration. It can't happen with a lot of cross-functional type of work. And it can make us rich, famous, and happy while making the world a better place, which is a part of it. And then here are a quick list of common failure points. And I wanted to rattle these off up front really quick before backing up to some background. And I'm going to give some examples, because we're at the very sort of abstract stratospheric level now, the very heady level. And we'll get to some examples here to put some flesh on the bone. But I want to highlight some of these key kind of issues, because I can imagine that some people, if people want to engage in conversation or whatever, might have different areas of focus. So I wanted to ping those really quickly. So content innovations must be managed as ongoing micro businesses, not as campaigns. I already spoke to that. Comprehensive integration across all customer-facing content initiatives, anchoring initiatives to audience development and journey management for individuals and accounts, which is, of course, very rare. Very often content programs are done in departmental silos with different reporting lines, goals, and often, I end up introducing people to each other within their own companies when when I consult with it happens on almost every gig. A
Yeah.
lot of what I do is very horizontal integration, multi-year roadmap strategy, and various kinds of things like that. So, and a lot of things, anything that where the word omni-channel is flying around, whenever I get into those things, I always end up bringing people to the table who often the people who've hired us have never met. And it's always good. So content innovation integrated into routine business planning cycles and life cycle of upstream and downstream processes. This is really key because where do people collaborate? And very, 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 very often, like pretty much all the time, every single client I run across, a lot of times the work they're doing around what should our content be is very often happening downstream of key business planning cycles versus upstream of them. And that's exactly the opposite way it should work. And I have a lot of very interesting case studies in moving cross-functional harnessed creativity, interdepartmental creativity upstream of business planning cycles such as marketing planning, et cetera, and showing how it's a complete game changer to really everything. Everything we talk around breakdowns between marketing and sales, it cures so many, it's an upstream fix that cures a lot of downstream pain in the world of content. And it's just a good planning thing to do, but innovation is kind of the sort of anchor term I'm kind of floating up on all this here. And then a holistic approach to goals and metrics. I already talked about that. And I talked about the value driver frameworks up front, and I'm going to show you one of them. Content, value, design, quality management criteria. So making sure that our hypotheses for why the content is valuable are turned into actual traceable management criteria that content is evaluated against, talent is evaluated against, and all of that kind of thing. Branded internal program and related deliverables, services, training, and tool sets. So that's what I did at 3M. I created a program which originally was called Content to Customer. But then my good friend Ryan Satry, who is one of my partners in crime there, said that revenue was way more important because at the end of the day, no matter how much executives like to talk about Jeff Bezos's empty customer chair next to them, no matter how customer centric they like to give lip service to, revenue is really what gets attention. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that the word revenue was welded to content, like welded to it, and became like a noun. It's like you have either done, you actually have your content to revenue plan within your marketing plan, or you don't. It's very binary. Anyway, so we created this program that was very, very successful. We had a community of some 800 members on Yammer. We were able to put on an internal content marketing world type of conference that had 600 attendees. We had, all kinds, those are just indicators, but we had, a massive tool set, all this kind of stuff, but having a branded thing that feels like something you can't neglect, that is a part and baked into processes is also really a very important piece of this, as well as for visibility. And then the strategic facilitators, the content experience architects, the people who can say, where you throw out a problem and say, hey, what's our data strategy and what are we doing with the future of AI and where's AI about efficiency versus innovation, and who can look at a landscape of disconnected content programs to identify where the data footprints are by which you could do personalization, let alone AI innovation, and figure out where those gaps would be, and blah, blah, blah. Like even just what I said involves so many different kinds of disciplines and experience to be able to Rubik's Cube that in your head, that the kind of architectural roles that we need to actually drive this stuff and that we have always needed are these kinds of people who have an architectural power and strength that can weave all that stuff together, but also that can work not just collaboratively, but with some muscle across the organization, because inherently what it takes to do these things is so fragmented across reporting lines, including people with bosses who want to eliminate each other's entire departments and all kinds of craziness all the time. This is the case. So if you are to wander into this world of, let's say, really having successful AI programs, of doing innovation, of doing these things, what it takes to drive it with any kind of efficiency versus these sort of, skunk work kind of people who have really been driving the future this whole time. It's the people who like collaborate and sometimes even ignore their bosses to collaborate across boundaries and across barriers, who are the people who've driven forward real digital transformation and real value very often, because the kind of top-down coordination we need is either so fragmented and can't be accountable through the various reporting hierarchies, but even have political and other kinds of things that are inimical to it. So the kind of people and teamwork and collaboration that we need around this requires something very solid and very strong. And the content and experience architect, for example, is one kind of role formation that I've been using a lot over the years, and some organizations take seriously and deploy.
And note, this isn't something that just reports into marketing. Content is not just about content marketing. Content touches every part of your business and needs to involve people across the business, because otherwise you're giving a really disjointed customer experience and internal employee experience that is absolutely not going to lead to innovation, and you're not going to get the business results out of it. So just had to
Absolutely.
chime in on that, because that is so important and so critical. And I'm glad that you called it out here the way that you did.
Thank you. Yeah. And there are what I've found is that there are three key horizontal forces in business that really are kind of the silo busters or the silo bridgers, and that's content, data, and customer experience.
Yeah.
However you want to rephrase any of those things, those three things are highly horizontal. And the geniuses out there that we need to really weave together and drive the future of business success in any of these things, and AI is just yet another spotlight. That's why all this new stuff with AI, and it's just coming back to the same old stuff. It's the things we've been saying for 20 years or more around getting your content house in order. AI is just turning up the heat on the basics, right? In many ways.
And so many companies don't have those basics in place. I'm actually giving a presentation at Marketing Profs this year about that. In order to actually take advantage of AI and machine learning and all of these tools, you need to have all of those really, unsexy things like governance and templates and documented, examples of what good looks like. You have to know all of that before AI is going to give you any chance at doing better.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so if we think about, let's take, customer experience, content, and data, and there are other ways we could massage that or other things, but that's a good enough, solid enough model to illustrate the point. And I'm going to focus especially on content and data. If you've got a really strong data person, and let's say they have a lead in trying to drive personalization for the business or something like that, if they don't have really deep content experience, they need to be joined, like welded together with someone who does. Like they don't think a thought without this other person, and vice versa. Like they really need to become besties at a very, 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 very deep level. If you have a content person who's weaker on data, and I'm not picking favorites here, but it's easier for this person to understand what they need from data as a business solutions advisor, as a translator of business requirements into something valuable to leverage the data a little bit than the other way around. Because in the world of content, if we look at, I remember my friend Naz Urbina, and somebody was commenting, they had a LinkedIn post recently about, and they were rattling off all the different content roles and departments that they're involved in. It was this really interesting post that had like 15 different roles just around content itself. And I'm not even talking about like, SEO specialists. I don't even mean at that level. I mean like at the content design and kind of these sort of higher level roles. And it's like, so just with the content discipline alone, it's so complicated. And I'm not trying to oversimplify what data is. I get it. It's also very big and very complex. But like my belief is that I don't mean to be either or about this, but my belief is that, how so often, whether it's the data people, the tech people, or the content people, very often they're talking about being invited to the table too late on strategic initiatives. Well, in my view, or one way to frame flipping that, is that the content and data people need to run the table much more. They need to be way more upstream involved, and they need to get very intimate with each other at a strategic level before expectations get set in the business as to what the hell they're doing with their money, period. Because once you get that train rolling, if that train gets rolling from a tech and IT centric kind of world, or if it gets rolling too much from one area of customer relations versus another, or marketing that doesn't talk to sales, or
Yeah.
these folks who don't talk to their engineering, or in pharma to their MSLs, or whatever all that stuff is, anytime any of these trains get rolling where those core architectural strategic roles haven't worked upstream to define what the opportunities are and how they're going to integrate, is going to create a multitude of failure factors in what they're doing, and certainly, and most critically, miss all these huge value opportunities that they had, not only in what to do foundationally, but also to what accelerates their roadmap. And one thing that I've said, because I've helped a lot of businesses with their multi-year roadmaps, and both on from a technology and a content perspective. And one thing I can tell you is that the more time you take to look across the functions to say, okay, if we're going to do this content work over here, let's say a next best actions and experience thing in our CRM for sales. If okay, so let's take that world, right, where you're getting, let's say, content recommendations dynamically floated up to sales on the basis of structured or unstructured CRM data, for example. Let's say we're talking personalization, and the personalization has not yet considered that screen yet in sales. They're thinking about some other area or that kind of thing. Now, let's say it's kind of early and they're starting to think about talking to sales, and they've made a bunch of promises around what they're going to do with their websites and marketing emails for lead gen or contact generation or whatever it is. But they haven't yet gotten to the point where, let's say, from an HR and talent perspective, let's say that there's a lot of churn in sales, and a lot of the people in sales are actually at a lower level of understanding of their customers and even of their products. And I had a client like this once who used to sell expertise, like there was a subscription service for expertise, and they had a massive flip in their sales department. So in their particular case, you have basically non-experts trying to sell expert products to experts. Okay, that's a disaster.
Good luck.
That's a disaster. Okay,
Yep.
so what we were showing is that by good, component content practice and personalization and harnessing customer data in order to make highly complex personalized recommendations to sales, they could actually play an expert on TV on the basis of what they were getting from those content recommendations, while also creating customized packages to actually deliver to their prospects to help them from a content marketing perspective in their business. So one of the side benefits of this is, let's say that you've got a sales valuation thing, like let's say 1 to 5. We had one at 3M called Customer Expert, and I even have a diagram for this somewhere. But we had this one, for Customer Expert and level. So let's say that you're at a sales competency area, and levels. Oh, sorry about the misnumbering, but levels 4 and 5. One of the subcategories might be Customer Expert, how well they know the customer, that type of thing. But let's say that your sales team is, given where it is, let's say it's very green and young, needs to be upgraded. And so one of the outcomes that you can promise as a result of this program is actually upscaling the competency of the sales team. In other words, by the end of a given period of time of interacting with this, you're going to take your sales from like a level 1 or 2 up to a level 4 and 5 at a greatly accelerated rate, or at least give them the appearance of being such, some faking it till you make it, in a good way, to their customers, right? So this is a way where whatever it is you're doing with your content is actually integrating across what's happening in marketing and happening in sales to actually help with human resources goals. But if you're not, talking to HR, if you don't know anything about where the sales organization is at from the map of their overall competencies from a talent management perspective, then you can't promise talent management outcomes. And that's one of the things that I was talking about before with this whole notion of looking holistically across value models. Because if you can now start to make promises from an HR and talent kind of perspective, then all of a sudden the kind of support that you might get for your programs might look very different than than if you're not doing that. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. So how do you end up being somebody who has this kind of approach to content? Because frequently it seems that, somebody gets kind of thrown into the content role or comes in through marketing, but to really have this kind of conviction about the ability for content to have this business innovation enabling um, property to it. I think, it takes being an interesting person with a non-traditional background versus just being somebody with an MBA. So I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your origin story and who you are, because I think that you're a very interesting non-traditional content marketer.
Cool. Are there traditional content market? I thought we were all weird. I thought we were all.
I've met some very normal content marketers. This is
No.
exciting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I have a little story here to show you how that arc and how it gets to the aha moment around the social impact thing specifically, and then into, kind of where we've been talking a bit. So for me, my story and content, it starts from when I was a kid. My mom was an anthropologist of crafts at the Science Museum in Minnesota. So I literally grew up in a museum. She worked at another place in the day, and I was there with her full time at night, running around the museum. And it's the best playground in the world for a kid. And one of the things that they had there is they had these actors and other volunteers, but also actors, going around and doing performances on the floor and explaining things to people. So where I started in content, well, like one of the main areas was in theater and performance, and that partly had its origin when I was like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid watching people transform into Isis or the soul of the mummy, and this is the actual mummy that was at that museum. And speaking about it. And that's also what got me into anthropology and cultural studies and that type of thing. But they had a youth volunteer program. So my public speaking career started at age 11 because they would let kids actually explain things to people. So to thousands of people a year, I would explain mummification and funerary archaeology to people who came into the museum. So that's where my public speaking career, but also to a degree my theater career. And we also had a lot of different theater companies come in and perform. So this is Tukak Theater, which is an Inuit theater company from Greenland that came in and performed. And even though they put their makeup on in front of the audiences, who were there on a Saturday afternoon, they transformed into these sort of really intense elemental entities and they reenacted a ritual that involved actually scaring kids in their village at a certain time. And they so terrified the audience that people would like flee, even though they watched them put the makeup on, and a man with a very fancy accent stood there and described indigenous shamanic yada yada yada. But like once they like came out and transformed into these creatures, they utterly terrified the audience. And that's when I also wanted to like scare people for a living as my career. And then the other piece involves cinema. So if you've ever seen the movie Cinema Paradiso, this is kind of my childhood. They had a film program there, and they actually let me. I was this rugrat who would sneak into the projection booth and watch the films alongside the projectionist, and they actually showed me how to do it. So I was actually assembling taking the reels and assembling them together, and I watched films from the most romantic place you can possibly watch them, which is from the projection booth through that little rectangle. And so I saw my first Bergman and Jacques Tati and William Powell, all this kind of stuff. I saw projecting it for the first time, and I'd walk around with little clips in my wallet. And later on, a lot of these things tied into what pivoted me into digital. But also, I kind of grew up also in a comic book store in downtown St. Paul, and had a massive underground and Mad magazine collection, and was a cartoonist. And I went to an alternative school where we could teach classes if we wanted to. And so I taught a comic book making class, helping people learn how to do graphic, illustration, narrative illustration, and all this kind of stuff. So making content and facilitating other people making content is something that's in my DNA, and I've done my whole life. And then when I got into my late teens and my 20s, that's when I went much deeper into theater anthropology. I studied different mime and physical theater systems from around the world, drama therapy, dance therapy, other things, and founded a puppet theater company and did a physical theater company. I taught at Columbia University in New York in the director's program for a while. I had a whole entire career, about a 20-year career in performance that overlaps with the digital stuff. But that's a place where I went that was also deep in storytelling, and very often I was doing things that involved themes from the history of religions and cultures, and so that whole kind of anthropologic sort of stuff has never really gone away. But this culminated for me in work that I was doing. For History Channel and Smithsonian. So my big opportunities came around 2004, 2005, where I got to do very deep. By the way, I pivoted into digital because I wanted to create movie trailers of what was in my head for the large scale multimedia theater productions and films that I wanted to make. I've got 5 productions I still want to make before I die. But I was learning, Flash and sound design and all these things in order to create what was in my head and sell the ideas. But I ended up thereby getting the skills to build websites and design and animate and do all these things by accident. And because I was kind of in the right phase of history at the right time, um, had some incredible opportunities. So because of my arts and my academic background, for the history of Jamestown for History Channel, I did all the research. I did about 12 hours of interviews with experts, read multiple books, storyboarded what became a 10-chapter interactive graphic novel around Jamestown and the origin of North American plantation style slavery and the relations to the indigenous and so on. And then for the Lakota, I did a very Ken Burnsy kind of thing there with a documentary of the origins of the Lakota, but it was an exhibit of these tribal history keeping artifacts. Anyway, that was like I'd sort of arrived in life. To me, if I could do projects for these people, I could die happy. But then what I learned is that once you've done your die happy projects, you forget about it, and you're like, okay, what's next? And you're looking for the next thing reason to stay alive. So anyway, but it was at this time that we had my first aha moment because the project we did from the Smithsonian won an award. We won Webbies and all kinds of really cool stuff for that project. We won a World Summit Award from this United Nations NGO that awards and supports social entrepreneurs who are applying the internet and content in ways that laddered up at the time to the Millennium Development Goals. We won in the category of e-culture and heritage. But that changed then to when the Millennium Development Goals switched over to the UN SDGs. These are now the goals that they ladder up to. And since then, around 2012, I joined this organization as a national expert and mentor and juror. And that's where I mentioned earlier that I review anywhere between 20 to, I think the most I ever reviewed in a year was like 120 products. But then we have a awards gala every year. This was at Abu Dhabi. This is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the World Summit Youth Award. This is the founder of the WSA. So it's through here and through studying all of these social impact kind of products that help me understand the value models that I realized were underneath content marketing. And my revelation around this came in 2005. My first corporate gig was with Johnson & Johnson, and it was building a lifestyle management platform for people living with diabetes. And the innovation goal here was, how do you make management of living with diabetes less labor intensive? Because it's the labor intensity that's one of the key reasons why people are not compliant with their diet or exercise and other kinds of things. So the whole thing is, how do we make it easier? So we had licensed content from Johns Hopkins for educational. We had this thing on there where you could go in and tell it what kind of food you like to eat, when you like to eat it, whether you had snacks or not, all that kind of thing. And it would automatically generate a shopping list for you in a meal plan that it would beam to your SMS. And this was back in 2005. So we were harnessing SMS back then in a really beautiful way. It was a really, really incredible thing. And what this and this is when I was getting into user experience and information architecture and digital strategy. So those are the things I realized back around 2005. I need to master these areas if I want to grow in my career. So I did. And this was my first corporate gig in that realm. And what this showed me, because I really didn't want to do corporate gigs. I wanted to be the Ken Burns of the internet and do more of the History Channel stuff. But what I realized through this project, and this is the whole ethic of content marketing, that we can take marketing and sales dollars, we can take business dollars, and we can invest it into content programs that actually do have a positive social impact, that actually help people live longer. Okay, so again, back to this, when you're doing content marketing right, and back to that circle around social impact, this is absolutely that. So this was my first major revelation around that. The second one came just a couple of years later, where I did a project with the University of Minnesota and Michigan, where we proved using science that you could take highly structured, intelligent content tailored to the psychographics of the individual and to their health goals and health history, and you could cure smoking, which is mind blowing. We showed that using intelligent content, you can cure addiction, and we proved it. And the way that was proved was by taking 1,700 young adults who are all addicted to tobacco and saying, using tailored content, using motivational psychology principles, assuming an intent to intervene or an intent to make their few $100 for participating in the program, but with some intent as a baseline among the other baselines, that the success was measured by 30 days of abstention from smoking, purely through a content intervention. No gum, nothing else. It was a pure content intervention. So this is another thing that really also showed me the power of personalization, the power of using advanced psychological models underneath your personalization trait model. So I still, to this day, use and try to apply really advanced psychographic models to personalization trait modeling and that type of thing. But anyway, but these two projects were the key ones that showed me, holy cow, we can take content and we can apply it to business situations, and actually earn people's trust and do good through business. And so that's what really motivated me. And when we look at some of these kind of hero projects, like early in the content marketing days, when they were putting up some of these hero projects like Amex Open, this, if you look at the social impact of this platform, which was basically just a blog and a forum designed to help small business owners be better small business owners, and it was their number one source of leads for small business, for the small business credit division, even though it was not a selling platform, but in terms of lead management and first party data, audience strategy, all that type of thing. When you look at what's the social impact of these things, when we look at Johnson & Johnson or Real View, we're laddering up to good health and well-being from a UN SDGs perspective. And then when we look at things like American Express, when we look at economic empowerment, we're looking at things like no poverty, zero hunger, decent work, and economic growth. But it gets even broader than that, because one of the things I was learning from, like, for example, one of my Egyptian colleagues at the WSA, this woman who's done a lot of women's empowerment stuff in Egypt, she was saying, hey, a lot of people focus on literacy and that type of thing when they talk about women's empowerment in these developing nations and so on. But really, economic power is what's key. Yep. Because if a woman doesn't control the money, she doesn't have power. And another example, and I don't have a slide for it, but there was this woman who used to work for, I think it was Goldman Sachs, who in her work with Afghanistan, and the way that women are treated there, she got pretty fired up about it. So what they do these incredible weavings there in Afghanistan, these rugs. And so what she did is she created an online global marketplace for their rugs, which immediately, once a family started participating in it, just shot their household earning like by orders of magnitude up. But they were only allowed to be in the program if women were then allowed to, all the women in the house, go to school, see doctors, and all that type of thing. And it had to be traceable. Like they actually had traceable accountability that women were getting educations, were getting to the doctor when they needed to go. They weren't just these sort of in-house slaves to their men. And so this was an example of what that Egyptian colleague was talking about, where economic power sometimes needs to take precedence over educational power. Otherwise, they have no power to even get the education in the first place. So anyway, so the kind of things that we can do depending on how our content platforms and products enable people and at a societal level are really quite profound if we just learn how to ask the question. And then the one last example I want to show before I pause, because it's really quite dramatic, is from Apanjan. You heard me mention this a couple times around reducing infant and maternal mortality at scale in Bangladesh. So back, at this time during the Millennium Development Goal era, you can see that the infant and maternal mortality in Bangladesh was just really, really quite extreme. So there was a product that was created to help them, which was a text message based information service that was timed to basically the woman's last period and up to the second year, up to the 24th month of the child's development. And it gave like more than weekly, like several times a week, information would be sent to them. There was a certain amount of two-way communication about it. And the whole goal was, how do we reduce infant and maternal mortality at scale at this point across Bangladesh, which is big enough. And the results were pretty amazing. And this is a really insightful one for content marketers. So if we look at the results of this, there were 600,000 subscribers within the first 18 months. 600,000. That's just in Bangladesh. Okay. Now it's low cost and free to the super poor, but 80% of the people paid. And this is a really insightful thing because it was free to anyone. So why would anyone pay? We'd think cynically, no one's going to pay if it's free. But actually the way it worked is that, for one thing, it was very low cost, but it was optional for people to pay. But 80% of people paid because they were so grateful for the service. So therefore, it was also revenue positive. So if used ethically as a business platform, imagine scaling this across India, across Africa, across Latin America. Imagine the size of the GDPR and whatever other acronym-friendly database you might have, where you could now conceivably get 1 billion people into a database if scaled properly with incredible geographic expansion. So whereas some initiatives, which are really beautiful, like what Procter & Gamble was doing in East Africa with creating bathrooms for young women who were menstruating, and they would stay at home because they didn't have bathrooms at school and it was taboo to menstruate. So they would just not go to school. So one of the things Procter & Gamble was doing to increase their market expansion was to build bathrooms and the relationships with the local people around that, which helped them. But that's obviously very slow, right? Very fast is because everyone has SMS. Even back in 2005, there was a lot of SMS at scale across Africa. Like in Uganda, there was a thing where they were trying to map children who were getting involved in war. They were trying to map that through SMS, and they created this massive, UNICEF did this, a massive map across Uganda, and Coca-Cola came in and licensed the data to be able to figure out their distribution as a reason for this, right? So like, if you imagine, instead of like, okay, let's build a bathroom here or put a billboard up by the Moroccan, an airport in Morocco there, all important things to do. But what happens if even ahead of your distribution, you're able to accelerate the delivery of saving people's lives through an SMS-based life-saving thing, or anything for agriculture or air quality or all this kind of stuff? Suddenly, like an air quality-based business or a Johnson & Johnson or anybody else could get a rapidly accelerated expansion into geographies to prime markets, even ahead of their ability to distribute there. And it could be revenue positive. So this is the kind of promise that we see when we start to think through some of the social impact lens and look at some of these best practices from basically saving the world, but try to find ways to apply these to some of these innovation principles to our content marketing.
And what I think is just really powerful is, in all these examples, it was using the text message, the SMS, which, especially here in the US, we get pretty lame text messaging from folks. Like, we don't get a lot of value add. You know, we get asked to take surveys, we get a lot of spam, we get phishing, but you know, there's so many more things that you can do with it, and it's such a much more affordable and accessible platform. And we just, you know, it seems that content creators and marketers are, you know, always saying, oh, well, we need to do video, we need to have all of this stuff online, and they're putting the creative output first instead of putting the outcomes and the people first. So I think that those are just really good reminders that you could have this outsized impact without having an outsized budget, when you're actually thinking smart about who your audience is, what you're trying to do, and how you can really reach them. Because those same people, they might have email accounts, but they probably aren't looking at them very often. But you get a text message, you read it. It's either pushed to your watch or it pops up on your screen. It is such an immediate way to interact with people. So I'm not surprised that having tailored content being pushed to people that way can have such an outsized impact.
Insanely outsized. What can be done through SMS is like one of the most under leveraged thing of all time. Like it's just crazy. I don't have time to really go into all these, but these are some of these kind of canvases that I use to help teams with their with road mapping, with collaboration and all this kind of stuff. And this is, I've got this fuzzed out so that if you zoom in, it's too foggy to see it because this is an actual client example, but I wanted to indicate that these things actually get used. So this is from a client where I had about 20 something people in a hotel room for a couple of days, like a Fortune 50 company group, omni-channel group, around like, what do we want to do with these things? How do we back up from a roadmap perspective and look across all our content programs and pre-harmonize them? There's a whole thing I like to talk a lot about around integrating roadmaps between your content programs, your technology, and your human resource and change management and talent development. But we don't have time to go into that. But one of the ideal things is to step back and look across all your programs, map that to what your revenue goals are. Like, let's say we're a $3.2 billion company now. We want to be a $5 billion company by X time. How are we going to get there? And so, if you look across the programs, start to say, okay, how are we going to roadmap these things for really driving investments? And how's our technology stack going to map to that, and kind of back up and do all of that? It's a very powerful thing to do. And in that context, not only in that context, because you can't always get people to do that, but I harness a lot of these creative templates that help teams almost from a kind of paint by numbers kind of approach to help them design content programs. One of my best cases of this, or one that I like to talk about a lot, was with the dental division at the US, which I did with my colleague Amy Falk, who is maybe going to join us today. Hopefully that can happen another time. But we did a thing with the US dental division where we took about 40 people through 3 days of training who had never touched content marketing in their life. And by the end of stepping through a series of exercises, we're able to then disappear into a room for 90 minutes as a cross-functional team and come back with 4 content marketing initiatives that were mapped to the journey that would equate to 9.5 million in new revenue just within a very short time frame, but they were evergreen, so it would go on longer. So I've got a lot of experience in this sort of how do you harness people in these things. And the reason why I'm branching off of SMS is because I tried to systematically get people to go through some of the exercises across all the channels. So in one of our exercises, we'll say, let's take some goals and pain points, against some of our business goals and so on, but like customer goals and pain points. And now let's look at how would you solve those using through, now pick any goal and pain point that you might resonate with as a participant in this. So we might have a salesperson, a support person, a marketing person, whatever, and maybe they have a dozen different goal and pain points to choose from. In the case of dental, we had 130 topics they could pick from just to pick one and then run with it. But so they would pick one, and it's actually really cool. So in the template, there were 130 topics, and they had about 10 minutes to just sit there and figure out which one they wanted to run with, which was amazing because through this, you started to find what are people gravitating toward in terms of their topics, which already reverse engineers some things about issues they know about for their customers. If an advanced salesperson comes forward and says, oh, I want this topic and I want that topic, they don't even have to yet have told you what the pain points are they hear all the time for why they picked that topic. It's going to be baked into it. In other words, in the process of innovating toward a solution, you already have that. And so anyway, so then what we would do is, for example, we have these cheat sheets for this where it's like, okay, here's 12 different tactical categories. Now you have to pick a tactic from each category to stand up through this topic that you've selected related to this goal or pain point. And so if you get, 40 people doing that and they come up with 12 ideas each, I mean, think about how many ideas that is in like 3 hours that you just got, right? So anyway, so we would do stuff like that. And the reason why I'm kind of digressing over here from SMS is because given our time, when I was talking about one of those success factors for having and stewarding collaborative creativity, this is a taste of what I'm talking about and a taste of what's possible, because none of these people knew jack about content marketing. The comms was very old school communication, brochure oriented. I mean, we had to make it so that these people could produce actual expert output without at all being experts. And through the right kind of templates, you can actually get there. But SMS is one of those things. And so when we talk about subscribability, so a lot of times and so this is just an example, by the way, of, one of these kind of canvases like email, article types, expertise forums, tools and knowledge bases, so SMS is like one of these kind of things we take people through. Oh, I just realized I was probably not showing you things because they're in this app. But anyway, threw myself off because I thought I was showing you something that I wasn't showing you. But but yeah, so so SMS, oh yeah, subscribability. So a lot of times we talk about, okay, how do we know that our stuff is valuable? And subscribability, retention, audience development, a lot of these kinds of principles are goals and things that we use to help tell us that what we're creating is worthwhile. And SMS is one of those channels that I have people work against quite a bit whenever I get the opportunity, because it's sort of a pure kind of environment that is looking to help people exercise the information as a service, the content as a service muscle. Because the goal is, how do we create an innovation, a content innovation that's so cool that people actually won't mind if their phone buzzes in their pocket when they're in the middle of a meeting? In other words, what do people care enough about that
Yep.
they want that interruption? And so, like in the case of personal safety, one of those things was that, a lot of times there are safety violations that maybe apply to certain people's sectors, let's say in construction or different kinds of things. And what people get busted on is sort of instructive for them about what they might not want to get busted on from, violating safety protocols or whatever. So that's the kind of thing from a news as information service, that people, maybe it's not a daily moment to moment alert, or maybe it is, maybe it's more of a weekly, here's your weekly roundup of the stuff everybody's gotten busted on that you don't want to get busted on. That's kind of very important because they're involved in saving lives and not getting sued and all sorts of other risk related things. So how do we find things that are important enough for people to care about? And SMS is an interesting one. And so from a screen grab potential, this is interesting, and this is where I'm going to wrap here, or at least pause, because I see we're getting close to time. But what I did want to share, I didn't want to share my business value drivers. That's what I want you to come crawling to me for. But I do have all these categories. Very often when I'm doing these projects, I'm looking across as many as 50, sometimes as high as 50 different value contributors. But when it comes to the audience focused impact, this is my distillation of the different value drivers that are underneath these various kinds of innovations that I've been looking at over the years. And at first it looks like a very cliche list when you're looking at it, but really this does represent a distillation of, at this point, would have to be having reviewed thousands of projects at this point. But you can literally take this model and whatever, create a GPT out of it and put some stuff into it and see what it spits out on the basis of these algorithms. But this is a pretty good innovation framework for then adapting. This is, of course, completely generic. It's not adapted to any particular sector or audience at this point. But then what we do is we take it and we adapt these things into ones that are. But anyway, so this is kind of an interesting tool in that space.
And we'll be sharing examples and some of these slides that Carlos will allow us to share with you guys over on the blog when we post the recap and the archive of this conversation. So, of course, I have to ask you, now that we've gotten people revved up, what is their next step? Like, what should they do next? What should they read next? And, of course, how can they get more from you on an ongoing basis?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Just Carlos Abler on LinkedIn is an easy place to find me. So as far as interacting with me, that's a good place to find me. Where to go to start? I mean, I have this like 400 slide deck on this that I think I might just turn into a thing and just public domain it. Because I don't know any single place to send people to. Where I can send people to for inspiration, to look outside the box. Like we already have Content Marketing Institute, Marketing Profs, and all these really beautiful folks out there, Andy Christadina, all these great educators in the community who are helping to expose people to best practices and different things to look at. But maybe to look at more of the social impact kind of space and through that lens, I'd recommend they go to the World Summit Award website, the WSA, just Google that. And that's that organization that I'm a part of. And I'll also put in a plug because I am looking. I nominate people for the awards. It's free. It's not a business. You get basically access to probably the largest network of social impact content professionals in the world. Probably the biggest, certainly one of the most amazing families of people. But going to their website's very inspirational because there you can find a lot of past winners. And so maybe you could look at different areas sift through previous winners. It doesn't have all the people who are nominated or people who made it to the higher tiers of nomination, but it at least has winners. And there's very, very, very inspirational work there to say, I'm thinking about, content marketing tactics through the lens of value for my business. How might I look to social impact and sustainability for some like other kinds of value delivery that I might not normally think of? That might be a great place to start, at least for inspiration.
I love that. And I also love the fact that they're truly merit-based awards because, so many awards programs are basically revenue generation for the organizations that put them on, which certainly has its place. But the fact that this is something it's just on the merits of the program, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Carlos, thank you so much for being here today. And I hope that this for everybody, like I said, our goal was that you felt like you were leaning over while we're sitting at dinner and talking about stuff that's really important to us. And that's very different, I think, than the way a lot of other people approach content. So hopefully we shook things up a little bit.
Cool. Well, it's been a really incredible pleasure connecting with you. I adore you, your family. That kind of just so many amazing people that we've been able to connect with in this space, and I treasure you. I treasure our community very much, and it's a great opportunity to share some of this wildness with my friends.
I love it. And we hope that we'll be seeing you out and about more. I hope that this will definitely make that happen.
Sounds
All right,
good.
everybody. It's time for everyone to get back to work because it is a Monday still. So we'll be seeing you back here next week for the next edition of Content Chat. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
guys.